This is the Get Vocal podcast.
So welcome to the Get Vocal podcast associated with the Blackpool FC Community Trust. I'm your host, Jack Sprigg.
And Callum Taylor. On today's episode, we have a very, very special guest who uses nothing but words to empower people, share stories, and help people connect. Today's guest is Nathan Parker. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you for
to the
having me.
podcast.
Thank
So,
you.
Nathan, introduce yourself for the people who don't know who you are.
My name's Nathan Parker. I'm an independent author and spoken artist from Blackpool. I guess there's a lot more that goes after that, such as like dad, Blackpool fan.
The important stuff.
Yeah, but essentially most of my time spent writing and performing and sharing words like you've just said in that wonderful introduction, by the way. Can I take you everywhere I go?
Well, yeah, it was a good...
Happily, I'll introduce you on stage wherever. Yeah, absolutely. So, how did it all start for you? I mean, I read your Spotify bio.
Yeah.
During lockdown and everything like that, but how did it start? Where did you find the love for spoken word or poetry?
I guess I loved reading as a small child, and then it's no surprise that when I got to high school, it fizzled. Any creativity fizzled, really. I was quite good at sport. Mm-hmm. Went to Warbreck High School. I don't know if you're familiar with Warbreck, but all-boys school back in the day. Wasn't the easiest place to go.
I went to collegiate.
Oh, did you? Oh, so you definitely know Warbreck then. Wasn't the easiest place to go. Often about surviving and getting through the day, especially in those early days. And it wasn't the kind of place where you said, lads, should we start a book club? So that love for reading and like creativity that I had at primary school just went. And my English teacher was amazing. I think she saw something in me and tried to push me.
Shout out.
Miss McGuinness, shout out Miss McGuinness, yeah.
There we go.
But it never really went anywhere. I was kind of just sporty, and that was that. I was relatively academic, but sporty, and that was they were my pastimes. So it wasn't until I was in my 20s where I rediscovered reading, and then retrospectively thought, oh my God, reading would have given me so much as a teenager. But see, you think you know better, don't you, when you're about 15? And then with every book that I read, I felt this sort of urge for creativity start to come back. Wanted to write one. I wanted to write a book, and I did. I ended up writing a book. In 2017, I wrote a young adult fiction novel. And it was a bit of a personal goal for me to do it. And it wasn't an easy thing to do. Full of self-doubt, second-guessing myself. Who did I think I was writing a book? You know what I mean? Didn't know anyone who'd written a book. And I'm a bit of an overthinker anyway. Same. So trying to step outside my comfort zone to do something that people like, us from Blackpool and ordinary people didn't usually do. I was riddled with self-doubt. I gave up a couple of times, kept going back to it. My wife will claim that it was her that made me go back to it. But, there was multiple factors. In the end, cut a long story short, I self-published it to get my mum a copy. And as it happens, it ended up doing all right.
Did all right.
It got shortlisted for Lancashire Book of the Year.
Amazing.
In 2019. It got shortlisted, top 10, and it was the first ever self-published author to make the shortlist in 30-odd years. So that was a little bit of a turning point. That's where I think the creativity started to be like, oh, hang on a minute, maybe I could do something with this. And so I kind of carried on that road and see where it would take me, and wrote a sequel, dropped to part-time on my job because I had all this interest about the books, and then boom, lockdown hit. And schools cancelled visits because they had to shut. And I was a bit kind of stuck, really, because I'd lost half my wages in pursuit of this kind of, pipe dream or whatever. And then the rug got pulled from under my car. The rug got pulled from under my feet.
Yeah,
that's the one, isn't it?
The spoken word.
Yeah, you sure you got the right person? And I had to go, I guess you could say, backwards in my career a little bit. I had a real tough spot at this time, mentally and whatnot. And I had to get a night job at a kids' home as well as working my other job. And 4 o'clock in the morning, one night shift, I was like, what am I even doing? I was on a decent trajectory. I had a good job. And it's kind of all changed, and I ended up tapping away on my phone. And at 45 minutes later, there was a poem there. I didn't call it a poem at the time. I didn't dare call it a poem at the time.
Just an idea in your mind.
Just like lyrics, words, kind of verses, whatever. Just poetry was like, oh God, no, I can't write poetry.
Spill of feelings.
Yeah, I actually like that. I'm going to take that, I think, Jack.
Brilliant.
And
I hope that's on camera. The next time it's credited, that's me. Oh, I'm joking.
hey, there's inspiration everywhere. I felt this poem was there about fatherhood, and it was a little bit of a reminder about why I was doing what I was doing, and backward step didn't necessarily mean it was over, all that sort of stuff. And I felt great after it. I thought, I feel lighter on my feet. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to do this kind of process again. And I did it about my mental health. I did it about being working class lad from Blackpool. I did it about political stuff. There was plenty of that to go at the time. And every time I thought, wow, this expressing yourself feels really, really good. And it coincided with me on the back of a really, really difficult phase period personally. I'd been signed off work with depression and anxiety. I was really struggling, and then all of a sudden this way of expressing myself came along, and I was I guess more willing to give it a go because of the stuff with the book. And like, oh, actually I was all right at that, let me see if I can do this as well. And I started to record myself and got over that initial like, oh, is that what I sound like?
It's scary. It's scary. You'll feel like this now.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. Yeah.
We recorded our first podcast. We've literally, during lockdown, we were saying for nearly 2 years, we're like, we need to do a podcast. And you record the first one, you go,
Really?
It makes you cringe a little bit, doesn't it? It does. It does.
Maybe no one does want to hear our voice. But no, going back to what you just said there, like I listened to the EP, and obviously the first lyric of the first song is I write poetry because it helps me stress less.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
And I just think that you just summed up that in the last 5 minutes, and I think it's incredible. Like, how did it all? I mean, obviously, where did you think that this could actually be a full time? Like, this could be me.
That's the interesting thing,
I have Nathan Parker now, the spoken word artist.
That is the interesting thing, because it took ages for me to really feel confident. I wrote the book. I didn't think I was an author until the shortlisting on Lancashire Book of the Year. That validation. I was like, oh, maybe I am an author, not just some mad guy that's written a book. And although there's not a difference between the two, actually there was a difference between the two. And the same sort of happened with poetry. I didn't really connect with poetry at school. And all of a sudden, because I'd had a few videos that went viral, both locally and across the north, people would stop and say, oh, you're that poet guy off Facebook, aren't you? And I'd just be like, oh, dying inside, you know, like,
The poet.
kind of, yeah.
No, that's not me.
That's sort of me, yeah. I mean, it was my auntie, but who's to
I know you.
Yeah, and I guess going and performing for the first time, that was a real nerve-wracking experience, because, again, inside my own head, thinking I wasn't going to be good enough, thinking they're going to find me out and they're going to think you're not a real poet, and all the other people are going to know what they're doing and I don't know what I'm doing. You know, all the stuff that we kind of con ourselves into thinking. And I guess just going and doing that more and more meant that I started to become a little bit more comfortable with this identity. And then, I guess, schools started to ask me to come in, and I was a youth worker. That's what my job was. I worked for Blackpool Council for 12 and a half years, and that sort of stuff came a lot more easily than the writing. You know, working with young people, that was what I did anyway. And because I was good at it, and schools said, I don't think they cared whether I'd sold 1 million books or whether I'd sold 250 books. The way that I was with their young people was what was the important thing. So that's where I started to think, hang on a minute, maybe there's something in this. And more schools asked me to go in, so I'd have to take days annual leave to go and do that, you know, kind of building my own little, what do they call it these days? Side hustle, they call it.
It's like a brand. It's your brand, isn't it?
Started to build this kind of idea of Parker Words and storytelling and empowering people to tell their stories, because it's not just for a niche club. You know, I went through this process of thinking storytelling's not for me. I can't do that. And I battled through that. And now I'm thinking, hang on a minute. Everybody's got a story. And in fact, those that have had the hardest times have got the best stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody wants to listen to a story where everything's rosy. Everybody wants to listen to a story that's got a bit of grit and maybe even a happy ending. So I reached a point where I couldn't do both. I had to either drop responsibility in my little side hustle that I'd created or leave work. And so it was a no-brainer for me at that time. I took the jump, And,
but at the same time, with you saying there, like, you leave the job that you necessarily weren't enjoying, but this other little side hustle is helping the greater good. And that's one of the reasons why we started our podcast, and it's the reason why we got so involved.
It's the fulfillment, isn't it?
Get vocal.
It's a big thing.
Because you're helping a lot more than just the immediate people.
Yeah.
For every person that listens to you, they then share it to then another 10, and they share it to another 1,000, and they go to 100,000. You're like, the greater good here is massive. It's incredible. So, but I can't.
I mean, I loved my job within periods. I ended up in a role where it maybe wasn't as fulfilling as previous roles had been, but work were brilliant with me during that period of me having a breakdown, essentially. Work were brilliant with me, and they helped me kind of change my role so it was a little bit more suited to my skill set. And, you know, I had some amazing experiences over the years. They were really good with me when it came to qualifications, when it came to, you know, opportunities. But like you say there was something that was building that potentially had a greater good for me, but also the people that I could work with and connect with. You know, I worked with young people in Blackpool and some parents and carers. Now I work with people from the age of 5 up to 94 recently.
Yeah, wow.
Was the oldest person that I've worked with so far in an old people's home writing poetry. And they were like, we can't write poetry, love. Oh, we can't write poetry, lovey. I can't write, I can't remember. I was like, it doesn't matter. Just let's sit and have a cup of tea and see what we come up with. Yeah. And before, you know, we had a poem about Fleetwood because it was up in Fleetwood, and it was their memories of Fleetwood growing up in Fleetwood. Yeah. And they couldn't believe that they'd created it. So 5 to 94 and everything in between, not just in Blackpool, across Lancashire, the Northwest. I think the furthest I've gone to do workshops and talks is Barnsley, Shrewsbury. So I'm kind of edging out of the north towards kind of maybe.
Do you think that's because like people who were from Blackpool or surrounding areas relate to the story? Because obviously a lot about storytelling is relatability, isn't it, to what you're hearing. If you're telling me something that I can't relate to, it's hard to get on board with it. Yeah. So the people within the Northwest as such, i.e. the same problems, the same issues, do you feel like that's a part of why people resonate with you so much?
I think
you're able to get it out there.
I think that's massive, yeah, I do. I think the openness and the ability is something where people don't expect it. And then when you're talking about something as common as, I don't know, anxiety, for example, and then people go, oh, I can relate to that feeling. And it's shared within a way that's, you know, relatively straightforward and accessible and emotional, and that relatability is a really, really powerful thing. Maybe there's people who can find the words for people who can't, you know, at times where people are struggling or celebrating, you know, and the scale, you know, it goes both ways. And I think
you feel like that's your job. You feel like well, not your job, but as in like that's
purpose.
Your purpose.
Well, I do.
To do this.
I do feel that, but I also feel that my purpose is to support people to find the words themselves. I love the performance element. I love the creativity element. I love writing poetry. I love writing stories, and I love the fact that people consume them in various ways, whether that's listening or reading, and get something from that. But I do think the other side of my purpose is to support them to do the same thing that I've done, and that's to be able to tell a story, whatever that might be. And the big thing for me is locally, especially in Blackpool, there's lots and lots of people telling the story of Blackpool and what life's like in Blackpool. Well, hardly any of them are from Blackpool and know what it's like to live in Blackpool. And we're the experts. We should be telling our own story.
It's the empowerment that you said there. You met with somebody last week who's 94, who can't write or who can't now have the ability to write or remember the stuff. It's the empowerment that they'll take away from that session that you've kind of gone, you can do poetry. They'll go back after you've left and they'll read it and they'll go, wow, I've still got it.
Yeah.
I've still got that. And that'll put them on cloud 9 for the next 7-10 days.
Very much so.
And every time they feel a bit down, they'll go, I wrote this.
I did this.
I'm going to read it back. And it's that little sense of pride that everyone then gets.
Yeah.
So,
very much so.
I think it's great.
One of the things that I want to know a little bit more about you is more like, So you went through the period where you were struggling to make the decision. There was probably a little bit of like imposter syndrome there, that you wanted to do this thing, you knew you were good at, or you felt as if you were good at doing it, but you didn't have that vote of confidence or that reassurance from somebody, something, someone, whatever it is. What was that period like? As in, like, how did you come through it? What was it that you used to say to yourself? Those kind of things that you can share with us.
That's a good question, because some days I felt really confident and I could take any challenge on, and that, I'm in the groove, and I'm made for this. I'm going to do it, throw me into a school, throw me into a prison, throw me into an old people's home, and I'm going to make it pop. I'm going to make it work. Put me on a stage. My poetry's going to, connect with the audience, and all these kinds of really positive things. And then other days I would just be like, I'm going to get found out.
Yeah.
I can't. What if I'm not that good? What if it
So
all dries up?
Critical thinking.
Yeah, and there's a wall of glass and it all shatters, and I'm made to look foolish or feel foolish. And I think what you've just said there was really interesting, where you're waiting for that validation or something. And I think I spent a long time thinking that I needed to wait for permission to do whatever it is that I wanted to do, to be let into whatever this world is, this world of literacy, for example, this world of poetry. I needed just permission to go in there, because somebody else had the keys and somebody else allowed people in or not. More often than not, when you look at the publishing world, it's kind of middle class. So, it's a very middle class sort of industry, and not often working class people get that many opportunities, and kind of sort of waiting for that permission. But what I've come to realise is, through self-publishing novels, self-publishing poetry, now self-publishing music, you don't have to wait for permission these days. There's so many ways that you can put things out there, that you can take control yourself and find your voice. And the more I did it, the more I started to believe.
So it came from you?
Essentially, yeah. And obviously I had so much support from, Blackpool in particular. Blackpool gets a bad rep. I tell you what, there's not many places like Blackpool that get behind their own. Get behind their own. Oh my days, the amount of support I've had from local people, whether that's buying books, buying tickets to come and watch me, at different venues, sharing my stuff, just reaching out and messaging and saying, keep up the good work, really rooting for you. That's what got me through. And the support of those around me that kept saying, you're gonna do well at this.
Yeah, it's massive.
Keep doing it. And I guess that combination of things, realising that I have got the control myself, but also the support of those around me and from the local community, was invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. I went through, obviously, when we were doing our research, I obviously know of you from, like, say, Go Viral, and he's good. And obviously when we came on, when we sorted the podcast out, and everyone was like, oh, Nathan Parker's coming on, brilliant. Waves. On Instagram.
Yeah.
Brings me to my next point. Did you find it hard to share your internal thoughts at first online? Did you have that, not validation as such, but did you think, this is really, like, for me, I've known you for nearly 10 years now.
Too long.
Yeah, all right. And that's the end of the podcast. But
yeah, about 10 years.
I've always been open with my feelings online, because I feel like you say, if you help one person by just making yourself look vulnerable, you're helping the greater good. Yeah. So did you find it hard originally to kind of get them pieces that were more emotional to you online, or did you think, do you know what? No, a bit of vulnerability kind of breeds trust, and for other people to come forward and speak out. And
it's a tough one, because I think there's a combination of factors. Again, I feel like I've done this every question you've asked is like, be like, oh well, it's not as clear cut as that. Let me waffle on for 5 minutes.
It's not though, is it?
But
there's a combination of things. So growing up, my dad had depression, and he was open about that. Not all the time, but we understood that depression was a real thing, and it affected, men as well as women, and I felt quite lucky that I grew up in a house like that. So when I started to hit my late teens and I started to recognise some of these behaviours and these feelings, we'd talk about it. And, that was a real big contributor to me being a lot more open about my mental health than maybe other people. Then I worked in a programme with Blackpool Council called Head Start, which were all about lived experience and encouraging people to share and be open about their experiences and their feelings so that we could impact change. And that rubbed off on me. And then I also felt a responsibility that how can I be an advocate for mental health and then not be open about it myself. And so I did find it difficult, but then the realization that the amount of positive things that could come from it was overriding that feeling of, oh, what if people don't, what if people think I'm whatever, all that other stuff kind of just drowned out that feeling of,
it fades into the darkness because you kind of the bigger picture is what you've just said
the
there.
impact, and there's a lot of good that's come from me putting my feelings out there through poetry. Myself, it's been a therapeutic release for me. I did one where I really wasn't in a good patch, and I normally up until that point, my posts on mental health, my poems on mental health had been quite reflective. So I'm in a better space now, but this is what the dark times feel like. This was right smack bang in the middle of it, and you can see it when I watch it back now. You can see it on my face. My eyes are glazed over. I look like I'm about to burst into tears. And that was probably one where I was like, should I post this or not? And then I thought, no, you can't just be the person that's like, hi, everything's fine now, but did you know that I've been through a dark patch? This was like, I was right in the middle of it, and I thought, I'm doing it. And the amount of messages I've had off men, in particular, but also women about themselves and their partners, actually. I can't believe what I've just watched. I've just started crying in the car watching it because you've just basically spoke about my life. People messaging me about medication. So this medication thing, is it legit? Like, will it make me feel better? Because I've been toying with the idea of going to the doctors for, and even to just get one of them is really powerful. But to get, dozens and dozens of them, over and over again about people reaching out about your mental health, that is, the fact that it's therapeutic for me fades into insignificance because the impact goes so much further.
You're like that beacon, aren't you, for all the people that, like you said before, you're the person that's able to like almost speak it into existence for someone that's sat there nodding, going, yeah, I understand exactly, but they've never actually said that themselves.
Yeah.
And you're the one that's putting it out, not on paper, but you're the one that's then saying it, and they're going, wow.
I mean,
that hits home.
Even just you saying you're like a beacon. Inside, I was like, oh no, don't give me that. I'm not. Because I'm still.
And that's what we were trying to do. Yeah. This essentially, what we're trying to do now is even just one person that sits there and listens to the conversation. They then go, like, they're sat there nodding, going, yeah, I felt the same way, or I feel like I'm stuck, or whatever it is, they're overwhelmed at this point in time, and that then makes a difference for them to either go and speak to somebody about it. Write it down, whatever it might be, try and maybe even write something on paper that will just, because that's what most people will say, to try and get those feelings out. Putting it down on a piece of paper can be one of the best ways, and you're just doing it in a better way than I can.
Well, it's all relative though, if you read some of my earlier poetry, it's absolutely rubbish compared to some of the stuff that I do now. If you read my first novel, it's technically poor compared to my third one because
you learn.
Of course, I'll get better as I try it. So someone putting pen to paper for the first time, don't even be worrying about what the quality of it is like. It's just the fact that the ink is touching the paper and something's coming out.
It's like that initial kind of. It's the initial start.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, like with the Monday sessions, with the Get Vocal Monday sessions, they run 6 till 8 on a Monday, and all it takes is for one person to go. They start speaking, and they get surrounded by other people who've got the same story, and they kind of go, I'm not on my own.
Yeah.
And everyone's around me, all kind of going, I've got that story. You've got that story. Well, you've got that story. Yeah. And then this little network of people all remedying? No. See, you're the spoken word. I'm not.
Well,
I don't
it is a
well.
remedy, isn't it?
But
it's a remedy.
They all therapise themselves. Another new word.
We're loving it. Yeah. We're good at this.
Tell you what, watch your back.
I wish I'd have brought a notepad.
I'm coming for your title. Maybe in 10 years' time. But no, that's it. And that's the same thing with you write it online or you speak it out, or we did our podcast originally, and then the Monday sessions. It's all that initial first touch of base, and it just escalates. It does, and it gets easier every time you talk about it. It gets easier, and it's not to say that you don't slip into another dark wave, but you kind of know it's all right. This feels familiar. It's only a phase. It's only a wave. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And I know that's a cliche, but every day that you work through that particular phase is a day that's closer to
you know, the kind of mood lifting, the fog lifting, the cloud lifting, whatever it is, whatever language you might use. To hear other people explain the feelings that you've got, it's just like mind blowing. It's like, wow, you feel like that as well?
Yeah.
I thought it was just me.
And that's it. And I think that this is the one thing that like we've first talked about, and we're like, you felt that, I felt that, you feel that, and I'm like,
Wow.
I'm not my own.
Yeah. I'm not,
And it's like that little like heavy cloud on your shoulders kind of goes.
yeah.
Just the fact that you've shared it, and that's the thing, but you're able to reach it in such a way that, you know, with social media now, that being such a massive thing, being able to reach more people rather than just the people maybe sat in one room together. But it does start with conversations like that, doesn't it?
It does. And it's picked back up in conversations like that. You know, having something on social media that might whip around a few thousand people is that's just a contributor towards, you know, this particular having spaces like Get Vocal, having a consistent space, because I'm not going to be on social media every week banging out a post. You know, I maybe I could be, but I'm not going to be the consistent, you know, thing or space or person. Places like Get Vocal, or, you know, having an open conversation with somebody that you trust, going for a walk with one of your mates once a week. That's how we
started.
So
this is genuinely how we started.
This is how we started. So like
during lockdowns.
During lockdown, when you could go and see one person per day, and we used to walk from Fairhaven. Yeah. We parked at Fairhaven, walked through to Lytham and back, and that was just one every Saturday, 2 hours, and it just had that like little therapy session.
Like that.
Yeah,
and because you just talk, and then that's like, well, we was like, should we do a podcast? Because these conversations are priceless.
Yeah.
And that's how we got through lockdown. To be fair, you got through lockdown by writing poetry.
Yeah,
everyone found like a little.
Some people found banana bread, didn't they?
Yeah. That still going bang.
The elite time of lockdown was banana bread and curtain twitches going. They've had more than one walk today. They've had more than their 30 minutes.
Oh, I can feel a poem coming on.
I feel like going. So an interesting point that you made previously before, a while back actually, just in the conversation, but saying that you grew up in an environment where it was quite open. I think that's quite rare.
Very rare.
So what did that mean to you, or what does that mean to you now? In the like, are you trying to preach that to your family and people around you? Are you trying to be that person for?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, my kids are 2 and 5, so it's probably not really on their radar as such, although Sonny, my eldest, is like having a 15-year-old, so sometimes we do have conversations about, he gets little feelings in there, and I'm like, it's going to be like me. It's going to be like me, which is what my dad did about me. He was like, I don't believe it. I remember the first time I told him about some of the feelings and this feeling of dread and lying awake at night and overthinking things that are going to happen to people that I love, and he was just like looking at me going, I don't believe it, you're just like me, you poor thing. It was that kind of conversation, but kind of make light of it, and I think that's really, really important because it takes the power out of the thoughts and feelings.
I was just about to say that, but like now, society, we are more inclined to talk, we are more likely to be more vocal, and the thing is, back when you were a child being brought up, to have that open, honest conversation in a time where everyone's like, just man up.
Yeah.
Just put a stiff upper lip up, you'll be fine. Whereas your children are going to come into a world now where, let's be honest, it's tougher to be a child and grow up in, but they'll be able to be more communicative with you.
They'll be more...
That is incredible. I must admit,
generally speaking, it does seem like there's a big shift towards... people being a lot more open and aware of these kind of thoughts and feelings that can manifest. And if they go kind of treated or uncared for, they can bubble over into like mental health conditions and stuff. There's a lot more awareness of that now, isn't there? And the younger generation are a lot more savvy around it.
Yeah.
My dad's doctor told him to go to yoga. He was the only man in a yoga session in probably
about yoga.
late
there is, isn't there?
Late 80s, early 90s. Well, there's, as we know, there's loads of people do yoga now. It's a well-known kind of thing. Men didn't do yoga.
No.
Men went to the pub.
Broga.
That's how, nice. That's how they dealt with their problems.
Another one for you.
But men went to the pub. That's how they dealt with their problems, and they had a few pints, and they kind of had a little rant with their mates, and that's it. And they went home, but that didn't actually do anything.
Yeah.
In terms of, in fact,
just
probably,
mastered, isn't it?
probably kind of compounded those thoughts and feelings, because you're dealing with like alcohol as well involved, which we know short term great, long term not so great when it comes to kind of dealing with mental health.
So if you are loving this episode with Nathan Parker, then the second half of this episode is due out very, very soon. Make sure you stay tuned with all the channels and hear it here first.